Well, what is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video, another one of these press conferences. I thought this was an important one to cover, being that it's kind of the pre-draft presser from Joe Schoen. I haven't gotten a chance to listen to it yet, much like the Dable one I did a couple of days ago. Of course, I read some of the quotes on Twitter, so I have a general idea of what questions are going to be asked. But yeah, obviously they're going to ask about the draft, Barkley, Dexter Lawrence, things that have been asked about Schoen in the past. But it'll at least be interesting to see if he kind of hints towards anything of where he may be leaning. Even though where we're picking, I think it's so hard to predict what the Giants are going to do. And I'm sure Schoen relays that message throughout this video. You're kind of just sitting in a spot where you're waiting to see who drops to you rather than who you're going to take. And that's ultimately what I think the Giants are going to do. They're going to take the best player on their board, but excited to see what Schoen had to say today. My first chance getting to watch this, so you guys are getting to watch it along with me for the first time. So let's dive right into the presser.
Just tell us who you're drafting and we'll leave.
I wish I knew. I'm trying to figure out. 25 is a little bit harder than 5 and 7 to come up with names.
What position group, when you look at this draft, what position group do you feel is maybe the deepest?
That's a good question. There's depth at different parts throughout the draft at all positions. So, it's hard to pinpoint one. Again, based on where you're picking, like if you're at a certain part of the draft, there may be a run on 4 or 5 players of that draft. So the depth's, the top of the draft at a certain position, then it's gone, and now there's no longer depth at that position. So I think there's position of value across all positions, throughout the draft, just depending on where you're picking. But I'm not going to identify one being stronger than the other, just where the value matches up with where you have them on the board.
What do you feel about the idea that this is an especially strong draft in the first round and that teams don't have an exorbitant number of first rounders maybe compared to the past?
Yeah, again, I don't know where everybody else has people on their board. I know that, we're going through the process now of who may or may not be there, and, we're pretty confident there will be a player there that we like.
You have 25 first round grades.
All right, so real quick there, and I read into this what you will, but he's basically saying there that we're completely fine standing at 25, and we're very confident that somebody that gets to 25, we're going to very much like with our draft pick. Meaning that we're not dying to trade up in this year's draft. Whether or not that remains true, we'll see, because even though he may be content staying at 25, there may be a player that they have on their board. Let's just throw a name out there, Joey Porter Jr., who he may feel is going to go in the top 15 picks. If he trickles down to 19 or 20, he may feel inclined to trade up, depending on where he has him on his draft board. But basically what he just said there is we're completely fine sticking at 25. We think we're going to get a really good player where we are. He didn't specify a position, nor should he. He doesn't want to give away anything regarding what his plans may be going into the draft. So I expect a lot of answers like that throughout this press conference.
I'm not going to get into how many first-round grades that we have. We have guys in the first round that we like, and we're pretty confident that there will be somebody there when we pick a 25 that we'll be happy with.
Joe, when you look at the COVID kids who are in an extra year of eligibility, does that help or hurt this draft, considering some of those guys are now older prospects?
Yeah, there are more players, that when we're going through it that are 24, 25 years old that you don't usually see that. You see it sometimes at certain schools, but there are more of those players. But we look at, each individual case-by-case basis. If there's an injury history or they're a smaller school or whatever it may be on the player, and then, does that affect their age, their position? So we look on them on an individual basis. Rarely does that come into to play and, deter us from drafting somebody.
Where do you think stand with Saquon? Like, are you guys still negotiating all with him here at the moment?
No, nothing's changed since we talked, whatever that was, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago.
So no active negotiations, you can put that on.
Nothing's changed since we talked at the owners' meetings.
How about with Dexter?
Yeah, after I talked to Dexter's representatives this week, we're in, dialogue's good there. So yeah, I've talked to him. Again, it's hard this time of year. We're deep into the draft.
So different answers there, right? Was asked about Saquon Barkley. He directly said quickly twice, nothing's changed. There's been no progress. We haven't talked to him in 3 or 4 weeks. And it's probably, I'm guessing his agent still has not come off the price point that they initially wanted, or has not come off of it enough. And the New York Giants aren't really willing to negotiate, past, a certain level, maybe that $12 million range. And if they're still asking for that 14, 15, $16 million, well, expect Saquon Barkley to be playing on the tag or to potentially be holding out or be traded by the New York Giants. That'll be up to Joe Schoen to decide, but continues to have his, his foot in the sand. He's not going to change his opinion regarding the value of Saquon Barkley, and he's about to get asked about Dexter Lawrence
in the draft prep. So, but yeah, we've had good conversations with Dexter's representatives, and we'll see where that stands here moving forward.
With Saquon, do you have a next contract offer in your head that you would,
I'm just going to get through the draft right now. Again, we're my focus.
This is exactly what I said in my last draft video. He didn't, Dable didn't say it, but, I was saying for all these people screaming about the Dexter Lawrence contract and how it's a distraction and how he's not at camp and why haven't they gotten things done? He's not happy. And I said to myself, it's just common sense. The most important part of the offseason is about to take place in 2 weeks at the time. Now it's a week. Joe Schoen's head should not be prioritized around Dexter Lawrence and the contract extension. He's got all offseason to do that, right? We're just in voluntary camp right now. You want to get that done before July, ideally. But right now, his head's got to be focused on these next 10 picks for this football team.
Focus right now is solely on that. So, there's no rush right now. I just want to get through the draft and then step back after that and, see what the roster looks like and, go from there.
Knowing what I just wanted to follow on Dexter's thing. Knowing that you've said on the record that you want to get something done and you're negotiating, is it disappointing at all that Dexter chose not to come here, or are you fine with that you'd rather not be here when you're going through this?
What was the quote? It's April 17th. I'm not going to give you that, but no, I mean, it's voluntary. So yeah, if Dexter chooses not to be here, that's his decision. Dexter knows how we feel about him, and he knows he's an important part of the organization. And, there's a business side to it too, but these, him showing up for the off-season program is voluntary.
Joe, you guys had obviously had discussions with Saquon previously, and there was numbers that kind of been widely reported. Free agency seems to have changed the running back market dramatically. Does that then alter your approach in how much you may or may not be willing to devote to that position in terms of finances?
No, again, I haven't really, when we had the conversations with Saquon, it was known that we were going to get to a certain point and then we were going to move on and regroup at some other time. So it was before free agency started. So no, that hasn't really affected anything that we've talked about.
It's like your 1-year deal. Does that impact how you approach running back in this draft?
No, again, there's players of all positions that are in the mix at 25, and I'm not going to rule any position out.
Joe, you have a pretty young team as it is. Can you realistically add 10 more, at least, rookies to your roster? Or would you like to, package some of those to move up so you have less than 10 picks, or trade a pick for a veteran player rather than have 10 more young guys on an already young roster?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, we'll see how the draft plays out. I mean, right now we have 10. So as we're going through it, if there's somebody we want to move up for, we have some extra draft capital to do that. If we want to move back and collect some, we can do that too. Again, you got to look at the roster, not just today, but 2024, 2025. Who's coming up. Again, financially, there's some players that are making pretty good chunk of money on our team and some contracts on the horizon potentially. So, those young cost-controlled players for 4 years that can be contributors, whether it's a role on offense or defense, 4 core special teams guys. So, I think it's important to continue to build depth and competition, and that's what we'll try to do with those picks.
Does that also include trading for like a pick for a veteran guy like you did with Waller? Is that something you're still open to?
Yeah, we'll always pursue any type of opportunity to better the roster, whether it's trade, draft, late round, college free agency, whatever it is. Definitely.
Joe, how important is it when you look at the roster and the guys you might draft, when you look at roster duplication, where you say, well, for example, we have a smaller slot receiver. We don't need to get another one. We have, this kind of a slot cornerback. We don't need to get another one, or do you just say, no, we're going to just get the guys in and we'll figure it out?
There's a little bit of that on offense. I think Dave's, that's one of his strengths, him and Mike Kafka, taking, the pieces that you have and then trying to accentuate what they do best. But we've had really good dialogue with the coaches this week. We're still doing it. We did it all morning. certain players and just going through what their role and utilization will be on the roster, first down, second down, third, what's their fourth down value. So if there's any discrepancies or, question from our part on what their role will be, we try to clear the air now on that. So, come draft day, we've had all these conversations, and if they're at a certain value, how they'll be utilized. So, they come in different size, shapes, speeds, but we're going through all those conversations right now.
Is that easier? As far as like, I mean, obviously you're not, thirsty to get a left tackle, you know what I mean? That was, but, as far as like receivers and things like that, there's a big group of them. Do you look at all shapes and sizes and say, because you have a head coach who is known to be able to move those guys in and out. So is that somewhere where you say, look, we'll just bring them all in and he'll figure it out?
Yes. And then, I mean, the offense has a very defined plan on how they're going to utilize, certain positions in. It makes it easy to go scout players for them. So yeah, I mean, we're going through all those players that you're talking about, regardless of position, regardless what they look like physically, and trying to figure out what their fit would be with the team and what their role would be.
Joe, how much easier has it been for you this year, knowing that you had the coaches going out and actually getting the pro days, whereas last year, Brian was still getting the staff together and maybe they weren't able to get out as much?
Yeah, coaches did a tremendous job. They're a big help. They're a big part of the process. I think it's important to, consensus build throughout the building. And, again, when you draft a player, if the coaches don't want him, the chances of success a lot of times are slim. So, we like to do our due diligence on all the prospects, and the more you can be around them, I think, it puts you at ease when you turn in the card for those prospects that you've been around them a lot and you know exactly what you're getting with your investment.
And you've seen the Giants position coaches go to a lot of these and actually do the drills. I think Ben Johnson was handling the offensive line drills with John Schmitz. And maybe it was Jerome Henderson. I can't recall. There was another one of the positional coaches that was doing a drill hands-on. And I think this draft, we're really going to get to see, like, I view this as like Joe Schoen's first, like, real draft. Obviously, last year counts, but he took the job on kind of late in the process. It wasn't his whole staff. He didn't have an entire year knowing he was the general manager for the New York Giants, planning for 12 months leading up into the draft. He is now at a full, real offseason with his men in place, scouting these players all year round, to really, get a good taste of each one of these prospects and to see how they're going to fit for the New York Giants. So I'm really excited to see how Joe Schoen nails this draft, because I think last year it was kind of condensed. It wasn't a real offseason for him in the sense that he had all of his guys in place. He had a full year to really plan for the upcoming draft. So I'm really excited to see how Schoen operates this year.
With your staff, I mean, again, you were just coming in, you were just getting everything together, you were making changes. How much more comfortable are you with the changes that you've made, and are they that much different than what you did last year?
Yeah, no, it's great. More time on task, going through more situations with these, some of the, the personnel, whether it's Brandon Brown, Tim McDonald, Dennis Hickey, Chris Rossetti, our pro director, came in from Miami. So going through kind of a cycle, a personnel cycle, whether it was draft, free agency, whatever it may be, you kind of get to know strengths and weaknesses of your scouts. So yeah, again, after going through it for a year, I definitely feel more comfortable this year going into it than, a year ago.
Going back to Buffalo for a second, in 2020, when you drafted Gabe Davis, what traits did you prioritize, and how did you project a fourth-round receiver to be a starter in the league?
Yeah, I mean, with Gabe, it started with his makeup. Like, he was off the charts as a just the learns, the ability to move him around, his work ethic. He checked all those boxes, and he's a very productive, receiver at Central Florida. So again, that was the COVID draft. I remember where I was in my basement when that happened. But yeah, again, it's not always what you can see on film. And I think that's why we go and spend so much time with these kids, is try to figure out what the makeup, because when you get to this level, everybody's good. What's going to give you the competitive advantage? Why is a fourth or fifth round player going to make it? Is it their work ethic? Is their tireless pursuit of, being great? Whatever it may be, you try to identify those traits through this process, whether it's bringing them in on 30 visits, going and seeing them. We talked to a bunch of coaches this week around the country, with our head coaches, position coaches, coordinators, and just get as much information as you can on, why is this kid going to be successful? And, Gabe was one of those players.
Building off that for a second, you spent a lot of time with the top wide receivers in this draft, your interactions with them going to dinner with a whole bunch of them.
I did.
You did. You didn't? You can say no. So I'm curious, what have you learned about the top of this wide receiver class throughout this process in those interactions?
What have I learned? How am I supposed to answer that, Jordan? Yeah, I mean, it's a good group of receivers at the top.
I love how he answers that. I can't wait to hear the rest of what he has to say. But he's basically saying, Jordan, I can't tell you how I truly feel about these wide receivers. I can't give away any of our draft plans. But Jordan's right. It's actually a really good question by Renan, because that's all we heard this entire draft process. That you name a top wide receiver in this draft, we brought him out for dinner. I think the top 5 projected wide receivers, Joe Schoen had steak with him or whatever they had for dinner. But they definitely showed a lot of interest in the first round wide receivers. But the ironic thing is, when you look at a lot of the players that, they brought in for visits and so on and so forth, it's wide receivers scattered throughout this draft, 3rd round prospects, 5th round prospects, 1st round prospects. So I think they're showing that they're going to take a receiver, but I think they have several different plans depending on what falls to them in the first round.
Of the draft, depending how you have them ranked. Everybody's got different strengths and weaknesses. And again, I think there's a lot of talented players in the draft. And it goes back to what I was just saying with Pat's question is, identify what's going to separate those guys from the path and what makes them great. Again, every year, I think there's 20 plus receivers that are drafted. How many truly go on to have, success? And, that's what we're trying to figure out.
How do you determine who you bring in for 30 visits and what's the value of those to you?
Yeah, it's some of it's elimination. Maybe, hey, we need to confirm there's some uneasiness with a player. Maybe we need to confirm they're not a fit, or, how will they pick up our system? Our offense is very complicated, or sometimes it can be medical if they're non-combine to get the medical. So there's varying reasons for why we bring players in, but again, it's a great opportunity, not just to get them around myself and Dayball and the coaches, but the rest of our support staff, whether it's training staff, strength staff, nutrition, whatever it may be. It's just good to be around these players as much as you can.
Joe, you've obviously talked a lot about the alignment for a full year with the coaches and scouts and the vision. How different is your board this year because of that alignment than maybe a year ago, where you didn't have that 100% alignment? Do you think about that, and how much does that shape where you guys are going forward?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that we weren't aligned a year ago. It was just trying to, get a grasp on how the players were going to be utilized in Wink's system. So I wouldn't say we weren't aligned. We ended up, there's consensus building, but there's definitely, after going through a full season and a training camp and, seeing it applied, how he's going to utilize players, there's a better comfort level, not just myself, but even Dave's. Dave's had never worked with Wink either. As we're going through it, how he's going to utilize players, 1st down, 2nd down, 3rd down. So yeah, there's definitely a better comfort level this year. But I wouldn't say we weren't necessarily aligned last year.
Yeah, I didn't mean that necessarily. I just meant you've talked about Wink and just knowing what Wink wants and how that changes maybe the way you scout players. You go and you'll see.
Absolutely.
So for you as a scout at heart, how does that change what you're looking for? I mean, you may look at a certain guy because he's a fit for what you want rather than what you may think overall. Right?
Yeah, and we've had to retrain a little bit how we look at different positions, or the value we put on them based off Wink's system. And I think that's what's most important, is what's the value for the Giants, and how do we see them, and how they're going to be utilized.
And that's interesting. That he feels like he's going to have a much better grasp of what they're looking for, at least from a defensive standpoint in this year's draft, because he's gotten a full year to see what Wink prioritizes in his defense, both him and Dable. Obviously, offensively last year, he was kind of in lockstep with his head coach, Brian Dable. They knew each other very well coming over from Buffalo. I have to think, and I've said this, I said it last year too, but I have to think in Wink's system, you think about the Baltimore Ravens year after year after year after year. They kind of had a revolving door in terms of the pass rushers. What was steady there was a very strong secondary. And in Wink's system, if you're going to be super aggressive, you got to prioritize that secondary. It's why I've been pounding the table for why I think the New York Giants are going to take a corner, and a man press corner specifically. That's what I think they're going to do, especially being that that's a strength of this year's draft. And versatile players, I suppose, from within the secondary. But I really think the Giants are going to attack the corner early on in this draft.
which we're still having those conversations. So yeah, we definitely had to retrain how we think about some things at different positions and what the value of, those traits are that we covet and where those align in the draft. But definitely feel better going into it this year in terms of what exactly he's looking for.
Joe, during this process, have you spoken directly with Saquon so that he knows?
Nothing's changed since we talked at the owners' meetings. I mean, I haven't, there's nothing new.
And again, that's very direct. That's very quick. And I know a lot of people are going to take that sound clip probably, but that's like the 4th time he's been asked. And every press conference the guy has, he's asked about it 10 times. So he's probably just fed up about it. I know a lot of people are going to take that as he's frustrated at Saquon and his representation, but I could just as easily say he's just frustrated at the reporters and annoyed because he's answered this question 100 different times, 100 different ways. But he just comes right out and he snaps at the reporter and he says, nothing's changed. Nothing's new. Haven't talked to him for 4 weeks. So obviously not a lot of progress on that front.
I haven't talked to him.
Joe, when you drafted the back of the draft, the way you are this time, how do you define what is a successful draft pick? And when, for anybody, 5 years from now, when you look at a player, how would you define success?
Yeah, we like to look at the play time over 3 years. Usually it's over 3 years what their play time is, the contribution, whether they develop into a starter, that's obviously a hit. If they turn into a good starter, that's good. That's what you strive for. But there's also role players. There's really good special teams players, that you value. So again, it's their role, it's their fit on the team, their contribution over that 4-year period. But usually after 3 years, if they're a contributor or not, and there's going to be different types of contributions.
Joe, a quick follow-up to Art's question. You mentioned kind of changing the way you view positions. What positions for you personally, I guess, have you changed your outlook the most on, kind of the way you evaluate?
Yeah, it's the front 7. It's just a different defense than I've been in. So it's really the front 7.
Interesting. So he mentioned it's the front 7 in terms of the way that he's changed his evaluation with Wink. So interesting. But I get his reasoning was it's a different type of defense than what he had in Buffalo in terms of the alignment with the front 7, in terms of the specific types of players. And listen, he went out there. I mean, they talked about at the beginning of the year. You saw Wink last year before the year started, stressing how the Giants had to be able to stop the run, something they were very bad at going into the year. But that's something that they looked at, right? They brought in Nacho. They're going to sign Dex to a monster contract. They brought in Okereke to help provide a boost in terms of being a really good run stopper. So that's something that he's really, focused on so far in free agency. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the New York Giants drafted D tackle early in this draft either, whether it be first round, second round, third round, especially being that I don't think Leonard Williams, unless he's extended, but I don't see that happening at this point. I think they're going to let him play out the contract this year, and then he'll probably become a free agent. But especially being that he's probably not going to be here much longer, I wouldn't be surprised at all if the New York Giants continue to address that interior defensive line.
You're building a team for the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Winks may not be here. You almost went this offseason. Is there a danger to drafting for a coach?
Yeah, it's actually something that Coach Parcells told me a long time ago. He's like, coaches come and go. You need to draft good football players. So yeah, you don't want to get too pigeonholed into scheme specific, because then you're right. Like if Wink gets a head job a year from now and you bring somebody else in that runs a totally different defense, you have a scheme specific player. So, part of our job is to balance that. Like, is this guy, again, at value, like he's only going to fit this one scheme. And yeah, and Wink's got a really good chance to get a head coaching job. If he moves on and we change things up, then yeah, you definitely have to balance that and be aware of that.
Joe, you obviously have your starting quarterback locked up, but are you somebody who'd like to have a young developmental quarterback on the team? And also, I say that because there seems to be a thought around the league that like Brock Purdy has changed, maybe reemphasized the idea that teams should just you pick a day 3 quarterback and see what happens going forward.
Yeah, I would just say right now we're happy with Tyrod. Tyrod is the backup, so I think we're in good shape right there.
You have a third. I mean, you don't have a third quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we had Davis Webb last year, so we'll continue to look, whether it's a veteran free agent or somebody in the draft or post draft, whoever it may be. But yeah, we'll have 3 quarterbacks in camp.
So that's interesting because a lot of people hinted at that the New York Giants may actually have interest in Hendon Hooker, because they brought him in, I think, for 2 visits. I know he was brought in for a top 30 visit. Obviously not as a starter, but a guy that the New York Giants have at least expressed some interest in. And he talked about at the top of this that he was bringing in some guys maybe to check them off based off of their medical history. And maybe the Giants feel like Hendon Hooker, because of his injury history, may go a lot later than a lot of people may think. That may be the reason that they're bringing him in. Players drop all the time. You look at Nakobe Dean, right? I think yet last year, was it, or the year before? I can't even remember. But everybody had him as a first-round pick. But because there was some kind of injury scare, I think he dropped all the way to like late 3rd round or 4th round or whatever it was. So maybe that's what they feel with Hooker. Or maybe they're trying to get intel with Hooker with Jalen Hyatt. That's kind of something that I kind of threw out there, being that they both played for Tennessee. What better way to get, more background on the wide receiver? But we'll wait and see on draft night exactly what they want to do. But he basically came out and said, we're very comfortable with Tyrod Taylor as our backup. And then he said, yeah, we lost Davis Webb. We may sign an undrafted free agent as the QB3 or whatever. It doesn't seem like they're going to stress quarterback, within the first 3 or 4 rounds of this year's draft. Let's put it that way. Maybe if a guy really drops late to the 5th or 6th round, sure, why not? Throw a dart at the board.
How do you view the interior O-line? Are you comfortable with where that is right now?
Yeah, I think we have 14 offensive linemen under contract right now. So yeah, just no different than in the owners' meetings, what I told you guys.
Joe, do you remain optimistic that Saquon will be on the field?
He continues to say that he's confident in this offensive line. And listen, I'm going to trust Shane. I'm going to trust Abel. It's their job to evaluate these players. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I was a little bit nervous. We'll see. We'll see how it pans out. But last year, this New York Giants offensive line, especially on the interior, was awful, especially as the season kind of wore along. On the right side, I do expect Neal to get a lot better, but I definitely worry about putting Bredesen at the center spot, and Glowinski and Azudu. We'll see. You got to hope for the best, though, if you're a New York Giants fan, if they don't really prioritize the offensive line early in this year's draft. But he was just asked about the offensive line there. He said, we got 14 guys. We're happy right now with what we got. That doesn't mean that they're not going to look to continue to improve it, though, in the draft. That remains to be seen. But I think all signs point to, and he's a pretty straight shooter from a lot of the things that Shane has said, that we're probably not going to prioritize a interior offensive lineman at least day one, and probably even with that 2nd round pick. But we'll see in a week.
Field for you at the start of this season? From the outside looking in, it doesn't seem like there's an obvious resolution based on where the 2 sides have been so far.
Yeah, you have to ask him. I'm not sure. I don't know what his plan is. I haven't talked to him in probably 3 weeks.
You think he still wants to be on this team?
I haven't talked to him.
Joe, from your experience before you got here, obviously we talked to you a lot about Buffalo, but you were on the road a lot there, scouting prospects. And I know when you go to pro days and campus visits and stuff, you're not just looking at guys who are in that current draft. I'm curious now in this process, are there guys, do you go back to your notes from 2 years ago where guys may have stood out to you when you were on campus? Someone may have said something to you. And has that factored into your evaluation of guys that are now available to be drafted?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of, I actually went through some of my books. There's some guys that are in this draft that I know I wrote in Buffalo. I meant to call Brandon and get some of those, but I can't find them. So yeah, there's definitely, I was on the road a lot more. You probably see 50 schools a year when I was in Buffalo. So when players do go back to school, that are now in this draft, it is helpful because you have a previous exposure to the player if I wasn't able to get out and see him this year. So there were some definite benefits to the amount of work that.
Now I'm going to have to do some research, and I'm going to try my best because this intrigues me. I think it's fun to try to find out what he's going to do. Obviously, this is a rare draft because of the pandemic here. You have a lot of players that are 24, 25 years old, and it was a good questionnaire, I think, by Art Stapleton, in which he basically asked him, does your prior work with Buffalo assist you in terms of the draft process this year? And he talked about how there were a lot of good players while he was with Buffalo. Well, his last year with Buffalo, I'm going to try to see some of the players that they were interested in that didn't end up coming out in that draft because of the pandemic. So I'm going to do a little research on that. But that is definitely an interesting dynamic to this year's draft.
That I was able to do in Buffalo. It's still paying off.
Joe, on Dexter, when a position's market keeps resetting in an off season, how do you balance as a GM, between not letting that dictate what you pay, but also trying to properly pay the player?
Yeah, and I think that's we have a formula that we have in place in terms of coming up with value with, of players based on various factors. So, we stay true to that. We're coming up with value, whether it's free agency, contract extensions, whatever it may be. We have a formula that we like to stick to.
The new deals enter that equation and maybe.
Yeah, same deal. Like anytime you're paying a player, whether it's outside the building or inside the building, we come up with a value, what we think is fair, and you create a case on why you see the value where it is, and again, it takes two to get a deal done.
Is Bijan Robinson by far the best back in this class? And how do you feel about running backs in the first round? It's always become a big issue, obviously.
Yeah, I think there's several good backs in the draft, and again, if it's a good player and a team decides to take them and they have success for their system, then I don't think you can go wrong with taking good football players. So, again, I don't want to pigeonhole myself into saying I would never take a certain position in the first round. So yeah, it's a good running back class. It's got some depth to it, and Bijan's a good player.
Joe, when you're constructing your roster, how much of your decision making is impacted not just by your own system, but combating what division rivals or contenders do well?
Yeah, I think you always have to look at that because that's the ultimate goal, is to win the division. So when you're building your team,
I got to give it to the reporters in this press conference. They are actually asking a lot of really good questions. That's something that I've said now for months after watching how the New York Giants played against the Cowboys and the Eagles. And he said yes. He basically asked them, do you look about, in your division and the strengths of the teams you're going up against and try to build your team that way? And it only makes sense. These are teams you have to play 6 times a year. Well, go back and watch the games against the Cowboys and the Eagles last year. We got destroyed up at the point of attack. We all remember the Cowboys game the first time we played them, in which Daniel Jones was, I think, pressured 25 times. We couldn't block to save our lives. Remember the Eagles games where we couldn't get any pressure on their quarterback at all in any game that we played. The offensive line struggled there as well. So if the Giants intend to compete from within this division, they've got to significantly improve in the trenches. That's my outlook on it. They also need to get strong cornerback play, because you look at the weapons that the Philadelphia Eagles have, and even the Dallas Cowboys have, right? Especially after adding Brandon Cooks. And you think back to that first Eagles game. Yeah, we did a really good job last year with what we had. We were able to get through the season with our defense. But when we went up against an elite, wide receiving core, the Philadelphia Eagles, they blew our doors off. Especially in that first game. Remember A.J. Brown hitting on a couple of huge plays. Devontae Smith carved this up. So that tells me, if you're trying to focus in this division, got to get stronger on both sides of the line and got to get better in coverage.
Team, you obviously want to get the coaches, what they want in order to run their schemes and execute their schemes at a high level. But you also have to look at the division. If there's, I reflect on when I was in Miami and they had, Gronk all those years. You're looking for some sort of linebacker that could match up and cover Gronk, and it was just impossible to find someone that could do that. So if there are players or schemes or whatever it may be throughout the division, you're always looking at that and studying it and seeing how you can maybe counter one of their strengths.
One of your traits is that you're able to separate emotion from team building, or when you have a player who has been a good Giant, but maybe financially or when team building and resources doesn't really make sense to build. I mean, do you find you're good at separating those two things? And if so, where'd you kind of learn that trait?
Yeah, no, not really. No, it's tough. Again, these guys, they're around, they work hard. We had a heck of a season last
year. Man, he is brutally honest. The guy basically just said, are you good at disattaching your emotion from the business side of things? And he literally just said, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. And he laughed about it. But you got to love Joe Schoen's honesty.
Last year, and you become close with them, and it's hard. But you have to separate it. I'm not going to say I'm good at it, because there's a human element on both sides for them and myself. But there is a business side to it. And yeah, again, in a perfect world, there's no salary cap, and you can make everybody happy and pay everybody. But that's something I haven't been through before. Last year, we didn't really, we didn't extend anybody from our roster. It was signing some people from outside the building. So after going through a season with the players, and then, this next step of the process, whether it's extending or players leaving the organization, yeah, the human element, I mean, that part stinks, because you do like all these guys, and, they put in a lot of work for you, and, again, starting this time last year. So it's tough to separate the business and the human element. Just the way Dave's and I, are around the building and getting to know the players. Maybe we do that more than most. But you do become attached, for sure.
You traded back a few times last year. We haven't seen you trade up. Just curious, like, what your philosophy on that is. I mean, would you be hesitant to dip into the next year's draft class to, pick from future?
Yeah,
draft
Dan, I'd be open to any of that. Yeah, I'm never going to rule it out. If it's the right player and the value aligns, I'd move up. If it was a, future pick, I would do that too. Last year, just where we were financially, we needed as many depth pieces as we can. So moving back a couple times last year just made sense. It got us, some more bodies that, ended up.
So there you go. Shane just flat out told you, yeah, he's definitely open to moving up, as you should be. You should always be open to anything as a general manager based on the circumstances that present themselves. I've said it now. I said it on my live stream the other night. I think it was the Knicks live stream, so there weren't a lot of Giants people in there. I think we're going to trade up. And I know that's kind of a hot take. I just look at the draft board. I look at where we're picking. And I look at the teams picking directly in front of us. And I think there's a potential drop-off after the top 4, maybe 5 corners, and after the top 3 or 4 wide receivers. So I think if said player, whoever, say that Joey Porter Jr. is really high on their board and he drops to 18 or 19, Deontay Banks really high on their board, he drops to that 18, 19 range. Addison, right? If there's a player they have ranked significantly higher than a lot of other teams at one of those 2 positions, seeing the teams that are picking in front of us and seeing that they very well may go wide receiver or corner based on the needs that they have, I do think it's very possible and almost likely that we could trade up if the right situation presented itself. And I don't normally feel that way going into a draft.
Contributing for us. So that was a little bit of the thought process that went into that.
The concept of a big play receiver change in the sense that when I was younger, it was a big guy who could run fast and catch a 40-yard pass. Is it now somebody who can catch a 15-yard pass and make it a 40-yard pass?
That could be part of it. Yeah, I think both of your comments are correct. Like if you got a guy that can take the top off and you throw the ball down the field and he goes up and gets it like a Randy Moss, then you'd love to have that. Or if it's I was with Steve Smith in Carolina, you throw him a slant and he can take it 80. So anytime you can generate yards after catch, I think that helps you. You don't have to do the 15, 16 play drives. Maybe now it's 6 because the guy had a 50-yarder in there. So I think all those things are important when you're looking at the receiver.
The center position in this draft. I mean, you don't have anyone on your roster that has extensive experience as a starter.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it for you to add to that position in the draft, whatever portion of the draft? And what do you think of that group in particular?
Yeah, I think there's some depth in the draft, but I don't think we have to. Again, we have these meetings as soon as the Eagles game was over that week. We had meetings and we went into the offseason. If we can't get Nick back, if we can't get Feliciano back, what does it look like? And talking with the coaching staff and the personnel staff, there's people in house that I think are viable candidates for that. Ben Bredesen, Jack, Shane Lemieux, JC, we just signed a week ago. So there's guys there that have played center, they've played games, and it'd be good competition.
So there you have it. Again, Joe Schoen hammers home the fact that he is not going to go above and beyond to draft the center in this year's draft. That's the vibe that I get. Now, if the right guy is there, absolutely. If John Michael Schmitz falls to 57, he very well may take him, but he continues to hammer home that he has a lot of faith on the centers on this roster, or at least the guys that could potentially play center with the names that he mentioned. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting to see who the New York Giants end up with in just a week. It's crazy that the draft is already going to be live a lot leading up to it. Can't wait to talk to you guys about it along the way. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.